So now we could talk a little bit about the negative effects of sitting, as far as for health and for physically what it does on our body. So I wanted to start, I really like this picture of the evolution of man, from caveman times to hunter-gatherer to being a farmer, and now back to the end where we're sitting slouched over on a desk. And I like to show this picture because I'll be talking a lot about how human beings were not evolved to be sitting like we are at this present moment in time. And it's completely unnatural the way our bodies are meant to work metabolically and as far as physically. And now you're seeing, skyrocketing rates of low back pain, neck pain, but also obesity and some of other negative health consequences, which we'll go over today. And so kind of some crazy statistics. So average American spends 55% of their time sitting, that's awake. And if you're an office worker, you could bump that up to 75% of your time. And like I said, this is an evolving phenomenon that, sedentary jobs since the 1950s have gone up 83%. So one of the things I like to say, and it's becoming, very popular, is this: sitting is the new smoking. And if we think about the way we thought about smoking in the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't uncommon for pregnant women to be smoking on an airplane, smoking in the office, at restaurants. And then as we learned some of the negative health consequences of smoking, we kind of woke up and people stopped doing that so much. And we're kind of in the beginning phases of that with sitting, but we're seeing similar negative health consequences as a result of sitting. So not to be too morbid, we'll go over a few stats here. Is people who spend more than 6 hours per day sitting with low levels of physical activity have a 71% increase in mortality rate. The WHO just recently came out and said physical activity is the fourth leading risk factor for global mortality. And prolonged sitting and just a sedentary lifestyle in general has been linked with cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, and depression. So, so there's some good research saying that sitting for just 1 hour could limit arterial function by up to 50%. So basically what this means is our body's ability to, the blood's ability to flow throughout the body after 1 hour reduces by 50%. And they've also found higher levels of circulating triglycerides and cholesterol in the bloodstream after sitting for 1 hour. However, and this is an important point, is that if you walk for 5 minutes for every hour of sitting, they found some of these negative health effects are completely reversed with that. So that's a really important point. And so other studies recommend standing, moving, and taking breaks for at least 2 out of 8 hours at work. But this is one of the big studies I wanted to talk about. I just find it absolutely fascinating. And it was wanted to talk about the kind of negative side effects of a sedentary lifestyle and how we spend our time in resting positions, how it's changed throughout our evolution. And that it might not just be being sedentary that's causing these negative health consequences. It's, like I said, how we spend these periods of inactivity. So what they did is they examined inactivity or non-ambulatory time, basically when you're not walking or standing, in a hunter-gatherer population out of this tribe out of Tanzania. And then they compared it to the industrialized world, and they looked at a few different things. They looked at they had EMG recordings, and we're looking at different postures when they were sedentary. They were looking at biomarkers in their blood and comparing, is it just being sedentary that's causing these negative health consequences, or is there something to the way you're being sedentary? And if you look at this chart here, all the way to the left, which is below 5%, that's the amount of time this hunter-gatherer population actually spent in like this passive, unsupported chair-style sitting. And you could see they change it up a lot. There's, over 20% of that time is squatting, There's ground sitting, which is like sitting cross-legged. They're kneeling, they're lying down. And the hypothesis was that our human physiology was evolved to have muscles basically constantly activated throughout the day, even if a low duration. So when you're squatting, when you're kneeling or ground sitting, your muscles in your core are still engaged to keep you upright. When I'm sitting on a chair unsupported, nothing's holding, the chair is what's doing all the work. My muscles don't have to engage. But in this other case with this Tanzania tribe, when our muscles are constantly engaged, there's a higher metabolic demand going on in our bodies. And so they believe that, this may actually be reversing some of the negative health effects. And they found that these biomarkers of increased cholesterol and triglycerides in our bloodstream didn't happen when they were monitoring these individuals when they're in their resting state. So there's got to be something to the way we rest. And like I said, this is the way we used to rest for thousands of years. And they looked and they found that the period of time in which they're in this resting state was about 9.82 hours where they're not walking or sleeping and things like that. And it's actually pretty similar to the industrialized world. So you can't take into account that it's just more hours with that. So, what is it to the way in which we spend our time, in which we're sedentary? So to me, some of the big takeaways is how we rest may be a key factor contributing to some of the negative health effects of inactivity. And one of the things that I hope I could convince you guys is to perform some low level intensity activities when you're sedentary to reduce some of these negative physiological impacts of inactivity. And like we saw in the other studies, is if we get up and move every hour and just go for a walk, that could also reverse some of these negative side effects. So here's some things I wanted to go over. And the key concept for our, especially office workers, is to change it up. The sit stand desk is becoming much more common in the workplace. However, I do have some issues with just the sit stand desk. It is static, but I do like that it's changing up your postures as well. But there's other things you could do. Is sit on a Swiss ball. The Swiss ball is what this woman is sitting on right now, and it's a stability ball, and what I'm sitting on right now. And you have to constantly engage your core, otherwise you're going to fall off the ball. And then her posterior chain, or the muscles on in the back between her shoulder blades, are constantly working to keep her upright in a good posture too, because she doesn't have that support of the chair on her backside. So I love Swiss balls, but you shouldn't just sit in a Swiss ball for 8 hours a day too. You should change it up, do different types of activities. You saw on that chart, they're 20% of the time here, they're 20% of the time doing other things. It's just keeping some low-level metabolic demand on your body. Other options you could do is to kneel or half kneel. I like to do this when I'm typing notes, is the half kneel where I'm stretching my hip flexors, and we'll review this later on in the presentation as I'm typing my notes. When you're taking phone calls, walk around versus sitting. If you're having a meeting with somebody, make it a common thing at the workplace that it's a walking meeting versus a sitting meeting. And some of these things may sound weird, but it's not the norm yet. But once it becomes the norm, it's not weird. So I hold standing staff meetings. And like I said, if everyone did that, it wouldn't be a weird thing, because we're understanding, hey, there's some bad things that happen when we sit for prolonged periods of time. So let's get up and try to figure out a way to stand or just not be slouched over for 10 hours of our day. If you have an email, you don't necessarily have to type up an email just when you could walk over to a colleague's desk and tell them the same exact thing in a couple of words. If there's elevators and it's not too far up, use the stairs. And big thing is stretch during and after work. And there's some good stretches I like to do that specifically target some of the postures that sitting puts us in, that stretching could help try to reverse. All right, so this is another these two pictures I really like, and this is called the third world squat. So on the right, see a young boy in a really deep squat. And then on the left, we see these older gentlemen playing a board game. They're all in a very similar squat position. And the point of this slide is that, the picture on the left for Americans probably looks odd that, how is someone in their 50s, 60s, and 70s spending time like that 3-year-old in that squat position? And it's because since they've been alive, they've been doing that exact same position. We, in America, once that you get to 4 or 5 years old, we just start sitting, and your body adapts to the demands you place on it. So if you're not demanding it to be in squat positions when you're, eating dinner or sitting or playing a board game or, just kind of socially interacting, your body's going to adapt and change and not be able to do some of the things it used to be able to do. But as we could see, we evolved at an early age to be able to do this. It's what we've done the last couple of years. It's not the norm, and it shouldn't be the way where it shouldn't be difficult for us to sit and squat like this. So kind of the big concepts is your body adapts to the demands you place on it. The gentleman on the left has been placing those demands on his body throughout his whole life. I'm sure that position is much easier than you think. The guy on the right, sitting passively on the couch, nothing's engaged. His body's going to adapt to it like that. So he's going to be a lot stiffer and move a lot differently, than some of these individuals from, maybe some of these third world countries that, aren't sitting watching Netflix in the afternoon. So sitting creates major imbalances, and the big thing is it creates adaptive shortening and lengthening of muscles. So the muscles in the front of our body tend to get short and tight. So our hip flexors and our thighs, our chest muscles, because we're slouched forward this way. And then the muscles on our backside get overstretched and they weaken because they're so stretched. And so these imbalances eventually could lead to pain, stiffness, and then injuries down the line. And so, to reiterate this concept again, the body was evolved to have low-level muscle activation and stretch demands occurring throughout all points of the day. Like that. So some of the other, biomechanical effects of the body and some negative effects of passive sitting I've seen is it really stresses the disc in our spine. There's a lot of good research is when we sit, we're in a lot of flexion. So my spine's rounded forward. Even my lower back, when I'm sitting, is rounded. So what that does is when our spines in flexion are bent forward, it increases our intradiscal pressure. And the disc are the little pieces of water-filled sacs of cushion between our vertebrae. And when we slouch forward, we push those discs backwards. And eventually we could cause herniations, whether we're doing a deadlift or just bending over the tire shoe if we're not careful. The other negative effects we talked about is it weakens our core and our posterior chain, and then it creates stiffness and just overall loss in spinal and hip mobility. So I wanted to go over some of these exercises. I have about 7. And just before we start, some of these exercises, if they're causing you pain, these are generalized exercises that I've found tend to be really good at reversing some of these imbalances that are created with sitting. But if they're causing you pain, everybody's built differently. These exercises are good for the majority of the population, but they might not be good for you. So if they're hurting, then obviously stop. So let me share my screen. So you can see some of these exercises. Okay, so first exercise I want to do is just a chin tuck. And so if we think about the position of our cervical spine or neck, when we sit for long periods of time, it's hunched forward. So it's this, as we inch up to the computer screen, Our lower cervical spine is flexed forward. Our upper cervical spine is extended. And we're spending hours and hours in this position. So that's why we need to go and move in the opposite direction. So a lot of these theories is if we spend too much time this way, we need to go the other way, extension. So extension is really key for people who sit for long periods of time. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna sit and you're gonna give yourself essentially a triple chin. You're gonna give yourself a chin tuck. It's a really flattering exercise. But as you see, my nose stays parallel to the floor. I'm not tilting up or down. I'm going straight back. So if I look from the side, like I said, it's the opposite of this. And if that feels really tight for you, especially if you sit at the office all day, it's because that spine hasn't been stretched or moved in that direction. So that's an exercise I really like. So that's just chin tuck and 10, 15 reps, and that could be done several times throughout the day. The other one is I'm going to go to the next part of the spine. So we got our cervical spine, that's the top of our spine. Now we're going to go to the thoracic spine, and same concept. That's part by where our shoulder blades are, and that's where you see the hunchback. So what we want to do is extend it in the other direction. So if you don't have a foam roll, highly recommend getting one of these. I use it for so many different exercises, specifically mobility wise. It's great for active muscle releases, but it's just great for some of the spinal mobility exercises we're going to talk about. So take the foam roll. You don't need it. It just adds an extra stretch. You're going to put it right in the middle of your shoulder blades, and you're going to put your hands behind your head, like so. Tilt that up for you. You're going to engage your core so you don't arch your low back. And what you're trying to do is lift your elbows up as high as you can in the air. You're trying to extend or arch that upper back in the opposite direction. You're going to hold for a 2 count and relax. Up. Hold 1, 2. Same thing. Sets of 10 to 15 reps is good, a couple sets. But these are stretches, so they can be done several times throughout the day. There's no negative effects if you're stretching multiple times. It's not like a strengthening exercise where you're fatiguing a muscle. You gotta worry about that. You can also try this exercise lying down. So same location, you could go, depending on where it feels stiff in that mid spine, I could go slightly higher or slightly lower. In my spine, I tend to be a little tighter here. So that's where the foam roll is going to be. And I'm trying to fulcrum or use it as a wedge to go in the opposite direction. So like we said, we're always like this. Now I'm trying to go in the opposite direction. I'm trying to extend that spine. And I'm just bringing those elbows backwards and up as high as I can in the air, holding 1, 2, 3, and back. The big thing that I see is compensation is people want to use their lower back. Abs should be engaged. And you're just arching or extending that mid to upper spine. Okay. Next one I'm going to show you is open books. So a lot of times what happens is our pecs get really tight when we sit for long periods of time because our shoulders slouch forward. And so it's part of the reason our spines are so hunched forward is because these muscles in our chest are really tight. So the way I like to stretch it is an open book. So what you do is you're going to lie on your side, you're going to put your hands together, head relaxed, and then you're going to take the top hand and you're going to lift it up over your body across the other way. And you're trying to go and rotate that arm towards the floor on the other end. But you're trying to keep your knees together. So once my knees go apart, stop right there. And you're going to turn your head with your hand. And you should feel a stretch in your chest and maybe also in that mid back. You're going to hold for a 3 count and then come back. Rotate, come back. These are called open books, 10 to 15 reps, couple sets a day. Another great exercise for that mid-thoracic spine. Actually, let's have you. Now we're going down. We did our neck, mid-back, and now we're going for the low back. And that's a common place where I see disc herniations. I've seen more disc herniations probably my entire career during COVID. And I think that a lot could be attributed to how much we've been sitting and how much we've been in flex positions. So great exercise. And like I said, not for everyone, but most people tend to respond really well. This exercise is a prone push-up or a cobra. You're gonna have your hands by your shoulders. Hips and legs are nice and relaxed. Then you're gonna straighten your elbows, arch your lower back. And then at the top, take a deep breath out, relax your low back and try to have your hips touch the floor. Some of you are gonna be stiffer than others with this one. And then come down. You're just holding for a couple counts and then coming back up. Hold, 1, 2, 3, and down. You wanna make sure your legs are nice and relaxed and you're not shrugging your shoulders with this one. Okay, next one's gonna be half kneeling hip flexor stretch. So when we sit, our hips are flexed upwards. So when we're sitting, our hips are like this for long periods of the day. So now we need to move the hips in the opposite direction or extend them backwards. So exercise I like to do for that. Is a hip flexor stretch and kneeling. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tighten my core, extend my hips forward, and almost thrust my hips this way. And I'm gonna take my right hand, if I'm stretching my right hip flexor, and I'm gonna reach it up over my body to the opposite direction. So I'll do it this way so everyone can see as well. Lean forward, tighten the hips, take the hand, and reach over the top to get a nice stretch on the side of your lower back and your quadratus femorum. But you should also feel this muscle right here, which is your hip flexor getting stretched. And like I said, very common muscle that gets tight when we sit for long periods of time. All right, next one is quads. Quads are one of those other muscles that gets really tight in our anterior chain when we sit for long periods of time. So I like to do a release of this muscle, and we could do releases and all the other muscles I talked about, but I specifically wanted to show this one. And so what you're gonna do, you're gonna lie on the foam roll on the top of your thighs. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna find a tender spot on one of those thigh muscles. And once you find it, you're not gonna roll like you see a lot of people do at the gym. You're gonna stay on that spot and you're gonna go up and down with the knee. And you're trying to do this for 20 or 30 count. And you'll feel that muscle hopefully start to loosen. And then you'll go to another spot. And repeat that whole process again. So you're trying to break up some of these tissue restrictions in that quad muscle that are contributing to some of that tightness. So this is a quad active muscle release with a foam. And then the last one is a little bit more active exercise. So these are just squat taps. You can do it at the chair, at your office chair at home, So you're just going to try to lightly, eccentrically tap your hips on the back of the chair. Your arms are going to be out straight. And you're just going to stand up. You're not going to stand up all the way. You're going to tap, up, tap, up, tap, up. And we're not trying to sit down all the way. Use your momentum and come back up. You're just lightly tapping that chair and coming down, going up and down. Obviously, if you feel unsteady or unsafe with any of those exercises, it might not be right for you. You know, like I said, some of these are a little general, but I wanted to give you what I think is some of the top exercises. And then lastly, let me share my screen again with you guys. Just to kind of review, I like this quote, move well and move often. So a lot of what we talked about is a lifestyle change. If you've been sitting as part of your work culture or just your desk job, you know, a few stretches here and there a day is not going to do it. It's a lifestyle change. It's getting a Swiss ball at home. It's getting a sit to stand desk. It's changing the way you do some of your processes and send emails and take phone calls, which you'll really start to see a difference. Another big pet peeve I didn't talk about is stop sitting when you're working out. We sit all day at work. The last thing you want to do is turn off your muscles when you're going and trying to isolate your biceps. Stand up, sit on a Swiss ball, stand on a Bosu, make other muscles work at the same time. Other concept is move your body in multiple directions. So we're always flexed forward. We should go backwards into extension, but we should also go sideways and rotate. Our body is meant to move in multiple planes of motion. And so we shouldn't just be this static forward and backwards movement with exercises either. And then lastly, make sure to get up and move every hour for at least 5 minutes. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. And then let me see if we got any questions. So Bonnie asked, did you just say an order from a doc is not needed for PT? If you have a private insurance, the majority of the time you do not need a prescription from a doctor now in the state of Illinois to see a physical therapist. If you're going through Medicare, you still need a prescription for physical therapy. Any other questions? All right, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, everybody. Well, I'm glad you joined me. Hopefully this was helpful. If you got any questions, feel free to email me. My email is kmartin@BEreact. Like I said, I manage the Lakeshore East location. And if you're having any ailments or anything, like I said, we do the free injury screens and could give you some tips and pointers as well if you're not looking for a full commitment. But if you need a little tune-up, that's what we're here for. Thanks, everybody.